Ever find yourself at the aquarium looking at a porpoise and thinking, huh, kind of like a mini dolphin, right?
Happens all the time.
But get ready to have your mind blown today because we are diving deep, deep into the world of porpoises.
That's right. And we're taking the plunge with, what else? Wikipedia's porpoise page.
A classic for a reason. And trust me, it is packed with fascinating facts about these guys. So, to kick things off, they're not just small dolphins, right? What makes a porpoise a porpoise?
Okay, so first of all, get this. Porpoises are more closely related to narwhals.
Narwhal, seriously.
Yeah. And belugas.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking about a whole different branch of the family tree here.
Exactly. They share a common ancestor with dolphins way back when, but evolution took them on a totally different path. And one of the biggest giveaways, their teeth.
Ah, yes. The trusty dental records, always a dead giveaway. So what's the difference? Dolphins have those pointy cone-shaped teeth, right?
Exactly. Perfect for grabbing slippery fish. But porpoises, they've got these spade-shaped teeth.
Sage-shaped, like for digging in the garden.
Right. You got it. Well, not exactly for gardening, but you get the idea. Those flat teeth are perfect for crushing thick crustaceans, bottom-dwelling creatures with shells.
So it's like having a built-in shellfish cracker.
Exactly. It lets them tap into a completely different food source than their dolphin cousins.
Smart. And speaking of differences, porpoises don't have that pronounced beak that dolphins do, right? Their faces are much rounder.
Absolutely. That streamlined head is all about hydrodynamics, reducing drag in the water.
Makes them super speedy, I bet.
You bet. And that's essential when you consider the range of environments these guys live in. We're talking tropics, poles, rivers, coasts, you name it.
Wow. So from the equator to the Arctic, they're out there braving it all. But hold on, how do they navigate those environments, especially if we're talking murky water, low visibility? Their eyesight must be incredible.
Their eyesight is actually quite good for marine mammals, but their real secret weapon is their hearing. Porpoises are masters of echolocation.
Echolocation, you mean like bats? They use sound to see.
Precisely. They send out these high-frequency clicks, and by listening to the echoes bouncing back, they can create a detailed map of their surroundings.
So it's like a built-in sonar system. That's incredible. No wonder they can navigate those murky depths. But what about deep dives? Don't they need some serious insulation to handle the cold and pressure down there?
You're thinking about blubber, right?
Blubber, the ultimate insulation.
And it's not just about warmth. Blubber is like a multi-tool for porpoises, insulation, energy storage, even protection from predators.
Wow. It's like a wetsuit, snack pack, and suit of armor all rolled into one. Talk about an all-in-one survival kit.
It's a game changer. And for mothers, it's especially crucial.
Oh, how so?
Porpoise milk is incredibly rich in fat, even more so than cow's milk, and it helps those calves pack on a thick layer of blubber quickly.
Essential for regulating their body temperature, especially in those chilly waters. It's like giving them a supercharged latte straight from the source. But all this talk about blubber and insulation makes you wonder, these guys must be incredibly fast swimmers.
Oh, you have no idea. They put seals to shame in the speed department, and it's not just those streamlined bodies and powerful tails. They've got a secret weapon.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What's the secret to their need for speed?
It's all in the neck. Their neck vertebrae are fused together, making it super rigid.
Wait, so they can't turn their heads?
Not really, no. But that rigidity is key. It reduces drag in the water, like having a perfectly streamlined hull on a boat.
So they've sacrificed some flexibility for that extra speed. Fascinating. It's like evolution said, you want to be fast, no problem, but no more looking over your shoulder.
Exactly. And speaking of speed, we can't forget their signature move, porpoising.
Ah, yes, that joyful leap out of the water. What's that all about? Just blowing off steam?
It might look like pure fun, and maybe it is partly, but scientists believe it serves a few practical purposes too. It can help them conserve energy while swimming, or maybe it's a way to get a better view of their surroundings.
So they're not just show-offs, more like strategic acrobats. But all this swimming, diving, leaping it makes you wonder, how on earth do they sleep? They need to surface to breathe, right?
They do. And that creates quite a dilemma for any air-breathing animal trying to catch some Z's in the ocean.
Right. It's like the ultimate sleep or drown situation.
Exactly. But don't worry, porpoises have cracked the code. They've evolved an incredible solution. They sleep with only half their brain at a time.
Hold on, what? Half a brain at a time? So they're like half awake, half asleep?
Exactly. One half of their brain gets some shut-eye, while the other half stays alert, making sure they keep swimming, surfacing for air, and staying aware of any potential danger.
Wow, talk about multitasking. I can barely make coffee before my first cup is finished, and these guys are out here sleeping and swimming at the same time.
They're pros. But it does mean they never truly experience deep sleep like we do.
Ah, so it's a trade-off. Safety and awareness for a good night's well, a good half-brain sleep. But speaking of trade-offs, all that activity must require some serious fuel. What are these guys eating to power those fast-swimming bodies?
Well, their diet can really vary depending on the species and where they live.
Hmm.
Take the harbor porpoise, for example. They primarily feed on bottom-dwelling fish, think flounder, sole, that kind of thing. But here's the interesting part. They change their menu with the seasons.
Oh, so they're like the culinary connoisseurs of the sea, following the freshest catches. What's their go-to dish during, say, porpoise springtime?
Well, when spring rolls around, they tend to switch their focus to herring and other schooling fish that are more abundant at that time of year.
Talk about making the most of what's in season. But what about the Dall's porpoise? We mentioned them earlier, those speed demons. Does their diet reflect their more active lifestyle?
Absolutely. Dall's porpoises have a taste for faster fare. They mainly feed on squid and small schooling fish, often diving to impressive depths to hunt them down.
Makes sense. Gotta fuel those high-speed chases. But you mentioned earlier that porpoises are more closely related to narwhals and belugas, and it got me thinking that's a pretty diverse family tree. Narwhals have that iconic tusk, belugas are known for their incredible vocalizations, but what about porpoises? What makes them stand out from their relatives?
That's a great question. And, one of the things that I find most interesting about porpoises is their history. Did you know that for a long time they were actually classified as fish?
Wait, really? Fish? But they breathe air, they give birth to live young. How could anyone mistake them for a fish?
It might seem obvious to us now, but back then, appearances could be deceiving. It wasn't until much later when scientists started digging deeper into their anatomy and physiology that they realized, hold on, these guys are more closely related to land mammals than they are to fish.
That's amazing. It makes you wonder how many other misconceptions we might have about these creatures. And speaking of misconceptions, what about that whole smiling porpoise thing? Is that just a trick of their anatomy, or are they really as happy-go-lucky as they seem?
Well, it's true that their mouth shape can give the illusion of a permanent smile.
Like they're permanently stuck in a cheese moment.
Exactly. And while it's tempting to project human emotions onto them, who doesn't love a smiling face, it's important to remember that we're talking about wild animals here.
With their own complex emotions and social structures that we may never fully understand.
Exactly. We can appreciate their smiles, but we also have to respect their boundaries and avoid anthropomorphizing them too much.
Well said. Speaking of respecting boundaries, it makes you think about our own history with these animals, especially when it comes to keeping them in captivity. It's a tricky one, right? I mean, thinking about a porpoise's life in the wild versus being in an enclosure just makes you realize how much they depend on their senses to navigate, to hunt, even just to survive. We've talked a lot about their amazing hearing and echolocation, but what about their other senses? We humans rely so much on sight and smell. What's the deal with porpoises?
Well, you might be surprised to learn that porpoises don't actually have a sense of smell.
Wait, seriously, no sense of smell at all, but how do they...
It's true. Those olfactory lobes, the part of the brain that processes smells, totally absent in porpoises.
Wow. But then how do they find food? Find each other? I mean, the ocean is huge.
It's a good question. But they've more than made up for it with their other highly developed senses. Remember, their world is all about sound. They're constantly listening, sending out those clicks, interpreting the echoes to build a sensory map of everything around them.
That's mind-blowing. It's like they're experiencing a whole different reality than we are. So sound is their superpower. But what about taste? Can they at least enjoy a flavorful fish?
That one's a bit of a mystery when it comes to porpoises.
A mystery, huh?
It seems they don't have a very developed sense of taste. But here's the thing. They do seem to have preferences for certain types of fish, so taste must play at least some role.
So maybe not quite ready for MasterChef, Ocean Edition. But hey, as long as they're getting the nutrients they need, right? Okay, but all this talk about senses has got me thinking, how on earth do these animals sleep? Can they even afford to close their eyes, especially with predators around?
It's a great question, and it really highlights the challenges of being an air-breathing mammal in a world of water. Because you're right, porpoises can't just drift off to sleep the way we do on land. They've got to stay conscious enough to surface and breathe.
So are we talking like a bunch of cat naps throughout the day? Is that how they manage it?
It's even more incredible than that. Porpoises have actually evolved the ability to sleep with only one half of their brain at a time.
Wait, back up a sec. One half of their brain at a time? You're messing with me right
I'm
here.
serious?
Yeah.
They've got this unihemispheric sleep thing going on.
Yeah, Hemi, what?
Unihemispheric sleep. It means one side of their brain is resting while the other side is wide awake, making sure they keep swimming, coming up for air, and staying alert.
Wow. Now that's what I call multitasking. I can barely walk and chew gum at the same time, and these guys are out here sleeping and swimming. It's incredible.
It really is. But it does come with a trade-off. They can't ever really fall into that deep, restful sleep like we do on land because they risk drowning.
Makes sense. It's a tough choice, sleep or drown, but they seem to have found this amazing workaround. But you know what they say? Gotta eat to sleep. So let's dish about the porpoise diet. We talked about the harbor porpoise and their seasonal menu, but what about some of the other species? What are they fueling those adventures with?
Well, we mentioned the Dell's porpoise earlier. Those are the real speedsters, and their diet is a perfect example of how they fuel that active lifestyle. Lots of squid, small, schooling, fish, high-energy stuff.
Right, they're like the marathon runners of the porpoise world, constantly on the move.
Speaking of which, what about the finless porpoise? That name always makes me chuckle. It's like calling a bird a wingless flyer. But I'm guessing they're just as capable as their fantastic cousins, right?
Oh, absolutely. And their diet reflects that adaptability. They're opportunistic feeders, which means they're not too picky. Crustaceans, squid, various fish, if it's edible and available, they're in.
Love that. The go-with-the-flow members of the porpoise family.
Uh,
But all this talk about food chains and ecosystems, it makes you think about our own place in all of this as humans, I mean. We've come a long way from those early days when we thought porpoises were fish. But have we really learned to share the ocean with these amazing creatures? It's a question we constantly need to ask ourselves. I mean, our history with porpoises and marine mammals in general, it's complicated.
Complicated is putting it mildly.
On the one hand, we've made huge strides in understanding their biology, their behavior, the crucial importance of conservation efforts.
Absolutely.
But then on the other hand, we're still dealing with the fallout of our actions. Pollution, habitat destruction, and let's not forget the ongoing threats of bycatch and even hunting.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. Knowledge is one thing, but putting it into practice, changing our behavior, that's the real challenge. And speaking of challenges, what about this whole question of keeping porpoises in captivity? Is that ever justified? Or should our focus be solely on protecting them in their natural environment?
It's a really complex issue, no easy answers there. I think it's important to remember that the history of porpoises in captivity, well, it's been pretty rough, especially in the early days. So many of these animals didn't last long in those artificial environments. They just didn't get it. We didn't understand their needs, the specific diets, the importance of social interaction, the mental stimulation they need to thrive.
It breaks your heart to think about all those animals suffering because of our ignorance.
It does. But the good news is that things have improved. Over time, as we've learned more about porpoise biology and behavior, our ability to care for them in captivity has also evolved. These days, there are some facilities out there that are doing amazing work, and I'm not just talking about animal welfare, though that's obviously critical. They're also contributing to some really vital research conservation efforts, even breeding programs.
That's good to hear. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope for the future of porpoises, both in captivity and in the wild.
Oh, absolutely. But it all comes down to commitment. Commitment to understanding these animals, respecting their boundaries, and being their voice. Because they can't speak up for themselves, can they?
It feels like every time we do one of these deep dives, we end up talking about conservation.
It's hard to avoid, right? Especially when we're dealing with animals facing such serious challenges.
Absolutely, but it's one thing to say we need to protect these animals. It's another to really understand the specific threats they're up against?
I totally agree. It's about making those connections, connecting our actions to the consequences for these animals.
Exactly. So let's talk about those connections. What are the biggest threats porpoises are facing right now?
Well, unfortunately, one of the biggest is something we've already touched on, bycatch.
Right, bycatch, those accidental catches in fishing gear, especially those gill nets.
Exactly. Gill nets are designed to catch fish by the gills, but corvises can get tangled up in them, and because they need to surface to breathe.
They end up drowning. It's awful. And it's a huge problem for the vaquita, right? That tiny porpoise species we keep mentioning.
It is. Sadly, the vaquita is considered the most endangered marine mammal on the planet, and bycatch in those gillnet fisheries is the #1 reason their numbers have plummeted so drastically.
It's heartbreaking to think that something we're doing, even unintentionally, could wipe out an entire species.
It's a stark reminder that our actions have consequences, even when we don't mean for them to. But it's not just fishing gear we need to think about. Pollution is a massive issue, too.
It's true, and it's something we hear about constantly, ocean pollution. But honestly, it's so overwhelming. It's hard to know what we can even do about it as individuals.
I get it, it's a huge problem. But here's the thing. Every little bit helps. Every piece of plastic we refuse, every bit of waste we dispose of properly, it all makes a difference.
So those small actions really do add up.
They absolutely do. And it's not just about plastic pollution. We also have to think about chemical contaminants, things like heavy metals making their way into the ocean and working their way up the food chain.
So those heavy metals end up in the fish, the porpoises eat the fish, and then those toxins build up in their bodies over time.
Exactly. It's this chain reaction.
Yeah.
And those toxins can do some serious damage. They can weaken their immune systems, make it harder for them to reproduce, even cause organ damage. It's a hidden threat that's having a devastating impact on porpoise populations all over the world.
It's scary to think about, but it's not just what we're putting into the ocean, it's also the noise we're adding.
Right.
I mean, we think about the ocean as this quiet, serene place, but it's actually incredibly noisy down there.
It is, and getting noisier all the time. All the ship traffic, sonar, underwater construction, it all adds up.
And that can't be good for an animal that relies so heavily on sound, right?
A major problem. Remember, porpoises use sound for everything. To talk to each other, find food, avoid predators. All that extra noise interferes with their ability to do all those things.
It's like trying to have a conversation at a rock concert eventually. It's just too much. But with all these threats, it's easy to feel helpless. So what can we do? Are there any glimmers of hope in all of this?
Absolutely. There are so many amazing people and organizations out there working tirelessly to protect porpoises and the ocean they call home. We've talked about CRVA and their fight to save the vaquita. And many countries are creating marine protected areas and implementing fishing regulations to help reduce bycatch and protect critical habitats.
That's encouraging to hear. But are those regulations actually being enforced? We know illegal fishing still happens, even in protected areas.
You're right, enforcement is a challenge, but there is progress. Governments and conservation groups are working together to increase monitoring, and there's a growing global movement to crack down on these illegal fishing practices.
That's good news. But beyond those large-scale efforts, is there anything we as individuals can do to help?
Absolutely. One of the most important is simply staying informed. The more we know about the threats porpoises face, the better equipped we are to make better choices as consumers, as voters, as citizens of the planet, really.
Knowledge is power, as they say. So read up on porpoises, learn about the organizations fighting for them, and spread the word. But what about those everyday choices you mentioned? What are some practical things we can do to make a difference?
But one of the biggest is making sustainable seafood choices. Look for certifications, like the Marine Stewardship Council's Blue Tick, that tell you the seafood was caught using environmentally responsible practices.
Got it. So check for that blue tick. What else?
Reducing our plastic consumption is huge. Those single-use plastics are a major source of ocean pollution. So switch to reusable bags, water bottles, food containers whenever possible.
Those small changes can make a big difference.
They really can. And don't underestimate the power of supporting organizations on the front lines. Even a small donation can make a real impact in funding research, conservation efforts, raising awareness, all those things that are crucial to protecting porpoises.
It's a team effort. We all have a role to play.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive into the world of porpoises has been incredible.
It really has.
From those amazing adaptations to those surprising family ties to, let's face it, some really tough challenges, we've learned so much about these often overlooked creatures.
They're incredible animals, a true testament to the power of evolution, and a reminder that everything in the ocean is connected, including us.
Absolutely. So the next time you see a picture of a porpoise, don't just see a smiling face. Remember everything they represent, their evolutionary journey, their resilience, the delicate balance they strike in this vast and complex ecosystem. Because their story is our story, and protecting them means protecting our oceans. And protecting our oceans ultimately means protecting ourselves.